Okay, I'm just gonna say it. I have some very unpopular opinions about succession planting. In general, I think it's an overhyped practice that gets a lot of attention in the flower farming world, but you guys keep asking me questions about it and want to know more, so of course we're going to break it down. So let's get right to it and let's go. Okay, my opinion on succession planting, it might have been a little harsh in the intro of this video, but really I feel like succession planting has become sort of this buzzword among flower farmers. And I feel like a lot of flower farmers fail to use succession planting to its fullest advantage. So let me retract my opening opinion just a little bit. I will say that when used correctly, succession planting can be a great tool that ensures you have flowers blooming in your garden all season long. And so in today's video, I want to help make sure that you're getting the most from your succession plan by breaking this topic down just a bit further. So let's start at the top. What exactly is succession planting? Well, in simplest terms, succession planting is the act of staggering the plantings of your flowers so that you don't have to harvest everything at once. By staggering your plantings, you're often rewarded with a continuous cycle of blooms throughout your flower season, making it easier to not only tend to your flowers, but also to market to your customers so that you can bring in sales for a longer window of time. I like to think of succession planting as a tool that allows you to get the most out of your growing space. Now, don't worry, I will go into more detail of how succession planting works in just a moment, but the idea is that by planting your flowers in waves or successions, the goal behind it is that it helps spread out your workload so that you're only having to focus on a small portion of your garden at a time rather than the entire thing at once. Back in 2019, when I planted my very first garden, purely as a hobby, I direct seeded all of my flowers into the garden at once. I was new to gardening, and honestly, I was surprised by how long it took me to get all of my seeds planted in the ground. Not only that, but that season I watched as all of my seedlings, the zinnias, the basil, and sunflowers, they all came on seemingly at once. They were beautiful while they lasted, but as quickly as they arrived, they faded just as fast. And in reality, I only had flowers blooming in my garden for a few short weeks. Feeling inspired to try my hand at selling flowers the following season, I was convinced that if I focused on starting all of my seeds indoors, well, that would give me the head start that I needed to have flowers sooner, and then I'd have them all season long. And that did get me closer to my goal of having flowers in bloom longer, but I was still nowhere close to having a continuous flush of flowers in my garden like the other flower farmers I watched on social media had. It wasn't until I finally grasped this idea of succession planting that things really clicked for me. Now, before we dive deep into how succession planting works, it is important to have an understanding of the different blooming habits of flowers. So all the flowers that we grow here at Two Sisters Flower Farm, they fall into one of three categories. The first being cut and come again type varieties. Now, these are often what I refer to as our garden workhorses. They are varieties that churn out buckets of flowers for weeks on end. As their nickname implies, the more that you cut from these plants, the more flowers that bloom. Flowers like zinnias, cosmos, dahlias, and marigolds, they all fit into this category. On the opposite end of the spectrum are your one-hit wonder type flowers. These flowers produce just one bloom. Now, single stem sunflowers, stock, blue plurum, and for many people, lisianthus, they are all flowers that fit into this category. Last but not least, there's a category of flowers that is sort of the middle road between these two categories that I just mentioned. These flowers are often called medium producers. You see, while these flowers produce multiple stems from a single plant, they're often not quite as prolific as those in the cut and come again category. Snapdragons, black-eyed Susans, yarrow are just a few examples of this category of flowers. So why does this matter? Well, because knowing the blooming habits of your flowers is what will help determine how many successions you'll actually need to plant. The clearest example I can give you is with single-stemmed sunflowers. For us, we grow a large number of sunflowers throughout the summer season. We just love how easy of a crop sunflowers are to grow. Our customers love them. They look great in mixed bouquets as well as in straight bunches, and they have a great vase life, making them an all-around great cut flower. Now, we grow the single-stemmed pro-cut varieties because we love how close we can space them. In our field, we plant them just 6 inches apart, and so it doesn't take a lot of room in order to grow a large amount of sunflowers. Single-stem sunflowers, however, they produce just 1 bloom per plant, and so if I were to plant 100 sunflower seeds at once in my garden, all 100 plants would flower at roughly the same time, and then they'd be done for the season. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong or bad with this scenario, but let's say that I harvest those 100 stems and I sell them as 10 stem bunches to 10 of my customers. Now, I'd like to think that I'd be happy because I've generated income for my business, my customers are satisfied because they get to enjoy fresh sunflowers in their home. It's sort of a win-win situation. But what happens when next week more customers seek me out because they'd like to order their own bouquet of sunflowers? Do I turn them away? Well, one solution is I could make plans to increase the number of sunflower seeds that I plant next year so that I can accommodate more customers. And so let's continue this example and say that instead of planting just 100 sunflower seeds like I did this year, I'm going to plant 1,000 sunflower seeds next year, again all at once. And so next year those 100 sunflower seeds would again come on all at once. And that's great because I've built interest around my product and I have customers willing to buy. But now the problem becomes, well, how can I handle that additional workload? It was one thing to cut 100 stems and package them into 10 stem bunches, but now I have to harvest 1,000 stems and bunch them into 100 bunches. As you can see, it's a fine balance of being able to plant enough seeds that you can meet your customers' demands, but not so much seed that you can't physically tend to the flowers that you have planted. So one way you can achieve this balance is through succession planting. And let's apply succession planting to this sunflower example. So let's say that I still want to plant 1,000 sunflower seeds for next year. I have enough of a customer base where I know that I can sell 100 of those 10 stem bunches, but I don't want to harvest them all at once. Instead, I want to spread out the workload so that I'm only harvesting 100 flowers each week. How would that work? Well, with a succession plan, I would plant 100 seeds at the start of my season, knowing that in 60 days, the number of days that it takes for pro-cut sunflowers to mature, I would have 100 sunflower stems to harvest. And each week after the initial planting, I would plant another succession of 100 seeds. By consistently planting more seeds, what happens is that once that first flush of sunflowers is harvested and done with, I have another planting of seeds just coming on about ready to harvest. As you can see, even though single stem sunflowers produce only 1 flower, by staggering my planting dates, I'm rewarded with a steady supply of sunflowers all season long. And what's even better is I've spread out my workload so that harvesting 1,000 sunflowers, like I've used in this example, suddenly feels manageable. Now let me answer a few more of your questions by showing you what this looks like in action on our farm. So I reserve a single bed within our garden just for sunflowers. Our last frost date, it usually happens on May 15th, so on or around that date, I plant my sunflower seeds. Let's say I plant 100 seeds per succession, so I'm going to plant 100 seeds on May 15th. Those seeds, they'll take 60 days to mature, so they aren't going to be ready until July 14th. Now for me, I keep the rest of my flower bed empty. That is until the following week when I plant another succession of 100 sunflowers. I plant those directly in line with the sunflowers that I had previously seeded, and so now my sunflower bed has small sunflower plants that have just sprouted that should be ready for harvest, on July 14th. And next to that are the seeds that I have just planted that should be ready for harvest on July 21st. And I'm simply going to repeat this process every week. Over time, my sunflower bed is going to fill with sunflowers that are all in varying stages of their growth. Now, once I get to that first harvest of sunflowers on July 14th, I could rip out that lot of spent plants and replant with future successions, or if I have enough room, I could simply continue on with my plantings, leaving the finished plants, till the end of the season when I clean up the garden all at once. It's really up to you to decide. I keep planting sunflower successions until about mid-August, which for me is 60 days before my anticipated first frost date. If I were to keep planting through September, there wouldn't be enough time for my sunflowers to grow and mature before a killing frost were to hit. Being able to count backwards the days of maturity from your first frost date is the key to knowing when you'll be able to plant a crop and still expect a harvest from it. Now, sometimes we do take a gamble and we'll plant sunflowers in late August, knowing that if we have a late frost that year, that we'll have more sunflowers than expected. It's really up to you how much you want to push the envelope. Planting late in the season, it doesn't always pay off, but it can be worth the risk. Just something to think about. That's really succession planting in a nutshell. Now, the same idea of succession planting also works with more than just the one-hit wonder type of flowers. But because both cut and come again and medium producing flowers are more prolific and bloom for a longer window of time, when succession planting these flowers, we often space out their plantings further apart and plant fewer successions. So unlike sunflowers that we plant every week, we may decide to plant zinnias only every 4 weeks. The number of successions that you'll be able to get from your season, it largely depends on your last spring frost and your first fall frost dates for your particular growing region. So by now you may be thinking that succession planting is great. It can solve so many flower farming problems. Why wouldn't I be all for it? Well, here's the thing. Succession planting, when done correctly, should lighten your workload, not add to it. What I see a lot of flower farmers doing though is trying to get so many successions from their garden that they turn and they flip beds almost constantly. They overcomplicate their seed sowing schedules, and in the end they just create a lot more work for themselves. So let's help you avoid this mistake and give you some ideas to best put succession planting to work for you. So one of the best ways to decide on which crops you need to succession plant is by trial and error. And this can be frustrating advice, especially to a grower that wants to dive all in on this idea. But until you have a clear understanding of how certain flowers will perform in your climate and under your specific growing conditions, it's difficult to know what crops will require multiple sowings in your garden. I really encourage you to take notes and decide how long a bed of zinnias, for example, will perform for you. I mean, if you keep on top of the harvest, can you get a harvest window of 4 weeks from them? Or do you get 6? Maybe you'll find that you only get 3 weeks worth of blooms before your bed stops producing usable blooms. Now you'll really know when it's time to flip a bed when you're having to hunt to find quality flowers. For me, when 3/4 of the good flowers have really come and gone, that's when you know that it's time for a new succession. Now, based on how we farm here at Two Sisters Flower Farm and the goals that we have for our flowers, we often can get away with just 2 successions of zinnias. Another flower farm, however, may need to plant 3. It's really dependent on your unique situation. Now, if you want to try succession planting but you're overwhelmed by the size of your garden, you may benefit from succession block planting, where you divide your entire garden into sections or blocks and focus only on one portion at a time. To give you an example, let's divide a sample garden into 3 sections where we plant one section early in the season, another midway through, and our last succession at the tail end of the season. If this were me, my goal would be to plant the entire first section on our last frost date of May 15th. I prefer to plant transplants, so I'm still going to do all the math to calculate when I need to start my seeds indoors so that I can have my seedlings ready to go on May 15th. And then on May 15th, I'm going to get that first section of the garden planted, leaving the 2 other sections unplanted for now. Now, I much prefer to plant the entire bed that I'm working on at once, so I'm not going to leave space for future successions within this block. I'm simply going to plant the entire block at once. As that first block starts to grow, my attention can then shift to the mid-season block that I'm going to plant next. Now, you may have to adjust your dates, but for the sake of this example, let's say that I'm going to aim to have that next block planted 6 weeks later, about the 1st of July. Again, what I would do is simply replant that exact same block of flowers that I previously planted. I'm just going to replant the same mix of flowers that are already growing in that first block. I may switch up the colors of the flowers so that it feels like I'm working with a new color palette, but personally I believe in keeping things simple And so I don't want to fuss with coming up with a new combination of focal, filler, and flare. If you're wanting to have transplants ready for this section, I treat July 1st as my sort of last frost date and use this date to count backwards to know when I'm going to start my seeds indoors for this block. And I simply repeat this process for that last block of flowers that I intend on planting, being mindful of my first fall frost date and planting my flowers in time so I'm still able to get a harvest from them. I would likely plant this last succession just 4 weeks later during the first week of August, as that should be enough time to take me to our first frost date of October 15th. So as you can see, when you're working with a large area, succession planting can really help you divvy up the work so that your workload becomes manageable. What's great about this style of block planting is that my first block will bloom, and as those flowers start to fade, my middle block should start to come on with more flowers, and even as the season wraps up, my last succession of flowers should pull me through all the way to the end with even more blooms. Realize that there's no hard and fast rules as to how many blocks that you'll need. How you portion out your garden will largely depend on how many bouquets that you need each week and how large of an area you are capable of tending to at once, without feeling super overwhelmed. Now, on the other hand, if you're limited on space, one of my favorite ways to maximize production is to plant seasonal successions. If you watched this video right here where I talked about the different kinds of seasonal flowers, you'll start to realize that you can use the different kinds of flowers like hardy and tender annuals and their different seasonal preferences to your advantage. So let me give you an example. You could fall plant a very early spring blooming flower like tulips in your garden bed. And once those are done, you could pull them and transition to spring planted hardy annuals, which will bloom as the temperatures are still cool. And once they've passed their prime, you could replace a bed with another round of tender annuals. Even though your space is small, you're able to harvest more from your space by harvesting flowers across multiple seasons. Like with block planting, you'll need to do some trial and error to really hone in on the timing of your different plantings. But if you watch that video, and I'll link it in the description box below, I give you some helpful tips as to how to determine your different seasons based on your frost dates. At Two Sisters Flower Farm, we do a combination of block planting and seasonal successions to really get the most from our growing space. You can see the exact map of how we plant our garden and the timing of how we do it inside of our quarter-acre cutting garden plan, which I'll link below as well if you're interested in learning more. But by focusing only on a small portion of our garden at a time, we're able to grow tulips that last us all spring. We follow it up with hardy annuals that fill in the gap between when our tulips finish blooming to when our warm season summer garden is ready for harvest. We focus on just a few successions during the summer months, and then we're able to finish our season with dahlias. Now, our dahlias aren't technically succession planted as they are in the ground for the entirety of our frost-free growing season, but since they thrive in the cooler parts of early fall, their timing of their blooms means that we can focus on harvesting dahlias at the tail end of our season rather than trying to fit in another succession of tender annuals. Realize that everyone's climate and growing conditions are different, and what works well for us may not work as well for you. You're definitely going to need to experiment and fine-tune what will work for you. While it may be frustrating at first, I promise that if you keep with it, you'll get much better at figuring out how to grow a continually producing crop of flowers over a long period of time. Okay, I know that this video felt long. If you're still with me, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I really hope that this video has given you a better understanding of what succession planting actually is and how you can use it during your own growing season to really maximize production. As always, let me know if you found this content helpful by giving this video a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button because it really does help us out. Now that is all for me today. I can't wait to catch you in the next video. Bye guys.